Hi, I'm Amy,
And I'm Kirsty.
and this is our podcast covering the highs, lows, and realities of parenting a child with neurodiversity.
Each week we'll be sharing updates from our lives and hearing from a variety of guests about their advice and experiences.
This is Love Needs No Words.
Hello, lovely listeners. This week on Love Needs No Words, we are joined by SEND Mummies. Gemma and Lisa joined forces and have been empowering SEND parents to navigate the complex education, health, and social care systems. They have a brilliant Instagram page with lots of tips and advice on DLA, EHCPs, and the law surrounding SEND. Welcome, Lisa and Gemma. This is the first time we've ever had two guests join us, so we've been really looking forward to having you both on. So this episode of the podcast, we're going to do a bit of a session on DLA because honestly, it's an absolute minefield that most of us are navigating. And I think most of us are learning on the job, or at least I definitely did. But first, before we get into DLA, how did SEND Mummies begin? Because your stories are so interesting. And I think that they are kind of a podcast episode in their own right, really.
Oh, thank you.
Do you want to start, Gem?
Yeah, so me and Lisa met on the playground outside a specialist nursery that our youngest children attended. So we started off just kind of chatting as parents, just waiting there for our kids to come out. And me and Lisa have older children. So a lot of the nursery parents that we were talking to were at the start of their journey because this is a nursery. The children are very, very young, starting from age 2. And they really didn't know, what was ahead of them, stuck with EHCPs and DLA, getting paediatrician appointments. So we were helping these parents on the playground, and it was clear that we were having an impact on their journey, that we were helping just from the knowledge that we had. Lisa's been in the SEN world a lot longer than I have because, as she'll tell you, she's got a brother who's autistic as well. So then we moved on to setting up the PTA for the nursery, which isn't your typical PTA. We're not really throwing Christmas parties and having fundraisers. It is more of a support network. And then after doing that for a year or so, we thought we'll take it to a bigger scale. So we set up TikTok first. We had a couple of videos that went a little bit wild, and then Lisa set up Instagram. And then we set up SEND Mummies as an actual business just end of last summer holidays.
Brilliant. And so both of you, as you said, have got children with additional needs. So can you just talk us through, sort of, I guess, how their needs are different and how it's been helpful for you in helping others?
Like Gemma said, I have got a brother, so not just my child. So this is how I entered kind of the SEND world. I've got a brother. I call him my little brother. I mean, he's 28 and he is autistic, learning disability, still lives at home with my parents. And he got diagnosed just as I was doing my A-levels. And I was fascinated by autism, the same way in which I still am now. And he then got diagnosed. I changed my career path and went to do my degree in inclusion and focused on autism in my final year. And then I went on to have 2 boys. So my eldest has got hearing impairment and autistic, no learning disability. My youngest has autism, global developmental delay, kind of severe hypermobility, lots of different diagnoses for my youngest. So they are completely different children, both on the spectrum, both present very, very differently. So I think it's good when people kind of are just entering that journey and you can see the vast difference between 2 children. And if there is any kind of big difference, it's definitely mine. They are so different to each other. But my eldest and Gemma's eldest are quite similar.
So I've got 5 children, 5 boys, which always shocks people.
You're busy.
My eldest is almost 17 now. He is diagnosed with autism and hypermobility and dyspraxia. He was late diagnosed though. He doesn't have a learning disability, and for that reason he went under the radar in an educational sense. I was always told he's fine when he's here, and then it was these big explosive behaviours when we got home. I was parent blamed. I was asked to go on parenting courses. The school was passing the blame on me for why he was behaving the way that he was behaving, because they just didn't see it. He was diagnosed when he was 13, and then he got an EHCP, and we ended up moving him from mainstream into, it's still a mainstream curriculum, but into an independent school because it was smaller. He struggles really badly with social emotional needs. So the environment of a secondary school was just too much for him. There's too many people, there's too many demands, too many subjects. And now he is absolutely thriving. He's in an independent college. He's studying his A levels, doing English and media studies, and he is doing absolutely fantastic. This is the first time in his whole academic life that he has had 100% attendance, which he himself is so proud of, and he's doing really, really well. He still has a lot of struggles and he has a lot of support in place for them, but he is doing fantastic. And it's just a testament to what getting the right support at the right time in the right setting can do. Then I have my two middle children are 14 and 13. My 14-year-old is actually on the pathway for an ADHD assessment at the minute. Again, that's late on. And then my two little ones, they're what really pushed us into the SEND world. My 6-year-old, Hugo, who's featured a lot in our videos, he is autistic with global developmental delay, severe learning disability. He's nonverbal and attends a severe learning difficulty school. And then my youngest is Miles. He holds the same diagnoses as Hugo, but he also has hyperlexia, which means that he can read and write. And he has developed language, and that started with echolalia and then grew into Gestalt language processing. And now he has a lot of functional language. Still struggles with reciprocal language, not a lot of it can make sense, but basic requests. He can ask me for juice, he can ask me for dinner, and he can ask me for an iPad.
All the main
So
things.
he's doing this well. He actually attends the same school as Hugo as well, but he is the top of his class. He can speak in different languages. He has a fascination of logos and can copy them really well, considering he's only 5. But yeah, they're both doing amazing, but their needs are very apparent, very high needs children, and that was our real start of our journey into the SEND world.
So you met on the playground with your younger children. What was that like, I guess, having that support of other mums around you who were going through a similar situation in comparison to your older boys? Where did you have that support, or were you kind of navigating the journey a little bit more on your own?
Definitely on our own. I think being the SEND parent on a mainstream school playground is very different. We say it all the time, unless you're living with a child with special educational needs, you can't imagine what it's like to be in that person's life. As much as we advocate for special needs and autism, as much awareness as we raise, and as inclusive and accepting that the world can be or try to be, it's very difficult to understand what a SEND parent really goes through and what their life is like. So the connection that we had outside of that specialist nursery was like nothing we'd ever felt before. And that's really the community that we are trying to build online.
But you definitely are, because I came across your page and I actually used your videos to support with my application for DLA, which I put off for absolutely ages, because I went through does my child deserve to receive DLA? Then, oh my goodness, how do I deal with these forms? And I put it off for about a year, and only just sent it back. So I guess for me, your page was absolutely like a lifeline, really, when I was dealing with that, and it actually made me feel like I can do this. It gave me tips of what to put in there that should have been obvious to me because this is my child, but actually I just kind of got a bit blind to it. I just didn't know what to put. So I guess going back to not really necessarily knowing whether Max would have been an eligible, child for DLA. Who is eligible for DLA?
So if your child has extra care needs than those required to look after a typical child of the same age, and those extra care needs amount to at least 1 hour per day, you are eligible to claim for DLA. You do not need a diagnosis. It is awarded purely based on care needs.
Did you do yours, Amy, before you had a diagnosis for Alex?
I think, yeah, from the paediatrician, I had something that said he should be seen as a child with autism, which was really helpful for me, actually, because I could use that when applying. But I mean, the forms are so overwhelming, which is why your videos, I wish I had that when I was doing it, because there's so many pages. I just didn't really know where to start. And it felt extremely overwhelming. Something I saw the other day was, it said something about if your child wakes before 7 a.m, you can apply. Is that true as well?
So the video was just highlighting that it's DLA case law that states that the average household, it would be reasonable to accept that the average household would shut down at 11 o'clock at night and wake at 7 in the morning. Now, that's not going to be the same for every household. It is the average household, but it's very hard to prove what time your family shuts down and goes to bed and what time they all wake up, because we don't have anyone else in our houses. So we rely on case law to interpret the criteria. So case law states that the average household would go to bed at 11 and wake up at 7. So, and the text in the video said that if your child is waking before 7, that period of time is classed as nighttime in terms of when you're completing the form. So any care needs that are happening before 7, but between 11 o'clock at night and 7 in the morning, could count towards the information you would need for nighttime care needs. And a lot of people took that to mean that they would be automatically entitled to high rate care. But actually, high rate care, the criteria for that is that they require significant attention to their bodily functions throughout the day and night. So nighttime care needs do actually come into middle rate care as well, because the criteria for middle rate care is that a child would need frequent attention to their bodily functions during the day or at night. So if they had no daytime care needs, but they required constant supervision at night for some reason, then they would only get middle rate care, even though it's nighttime care needs. I think the video was read a little bit wrong.
People were thinking
It did.
people were like, great, this. And then it got a bit confusing because I know that DLA do tell some people, nighttime starts when your household goes to sleep. But it's like Gemma was saying, we're relying on case law, and that is what case law states. But yeah, that video was one of the biggest ones. But in a little while, most comments, most DMs.
I saw it and I thought, wow, for me, this is really relevant because I have a really chronically early riser and have done for absolutely donkey's years. But how do you go about proving that? Because he's not under kind of sleep care teams or anything. When he was seen by the community paediatrician, they did flag that there was obviously early rising, but he's not because he goes to bed okay, they didn't want to, it wasn't appropriate for any medication for it. So he's not under any sleep care teams. How do you evidence that there's sleep kind of concerns that mean that you're up at ungodly hours of the morning or into the night or through the night for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, I've got one that likes to wake before I've even gone to bed. My Hugo, he likes to wake somewhere between 11 at night and midnight. And that could be him up for until the following night. He did it last night. He woke up at midnight and he's gone to school today for the whole day. He did have a little snooze for about 10 minutes in the car, but he's gone the whole day and is still up now downstairs with my husband. I don't know where they get their energy from. So you don't need evidence from a sleep clinic, and you don't need a prescription of melatonin to prove nighttime care needs, although they are helpful pieces of evidence, very helpful pieces of evidence. But basically all you need is some kind of medical report or letter that makes reference to sleep disturbance, sleep issues. So it's basically where you're having these appointments with the paediatrician or your GP, and you've mentioned that, they are not sleeping like a typical child. If a medical professional puts reference to that in writing, then that is good enough evidence to prove that there is nighttime waking happening. But when we look at the high rate care criteria, it's not just that the child is waking, it's that you're providing care in those moments. So if we look back to the criteria, it states frequent attention to bodily function at short intervals throughout the day, throughout the night. So a lot of people who are already in receipt of middle rate care, they'll probably notice that on their award letter from DLA, it says that you are entitled to middle rate care because you require frequent attention to bodily functions at short intervals throughout the day. That's normally what the letters say. So if you then had a piece of evidence that made reference to nighttime waking or sleep disturbance or sleep issues, what you would need to state to DLA is that, here is my evidence that proves my child is waking in the night. You've already accepted that my child requires this level of care when they're awake during the day. Therefore, it would be reasonable to expect that they would require the same amount of care if they were waking during the night, given that their condition, i.e. autism, is not a fluctuating condition. It's not like their autism all of a sudden goes away overnight. If they're awake in the night, they're going to be displaying the same kind of behaviours, the same level of danger awareness. So that's how you would evidence that. And a sleep diary is a very
sleep diary.
good,
Okay.
good
really good
thing to
tip.
send in. A comprehensive
And we
sleep
do
diary.
Yeah, and we do get, obviously, I know you said you don't have any kind of sleep clinic, but we lots of people who we will help fill out forms do have prescriptions of melatonin. That's another good way to evidence it, because obviously that's significant enough that the pediatricians prescribed melatonin.
Have you got any other hints and tips for people listening that have got that form in front of them and are sort of feeling really stressed about starting it?
It is a really stressful form, a really overwhelming form. And even though we do these forms for people every single day, it doesn't mean that they're not overwhelming for us. We say it all the time, filling out a DLA form for your child, for your own child, there is so much emotion attached to that. It's such a difficult form because you're writing down all the negative things about your child, all the things that they can't do, all the things that they struggle with. It's so much easier to do that for someone else, like what we do for a job now, because that, although we are invested in that family and we want to, produce the best form for them to reflect their child's true needs, that emotion isn't there like it is when it's your own child. I've still got DLA forms sitting on my dining room table for one of my children who I need to add mobility to, and I just have not got round to it. I might book Lisa in to do it for me. But what we always say is you don't need to sit there and do it all in one go. Take your time with the form. It's a long form. It is draining. Have a glass of gin. And when you've finished, sit there and write down a list of all the amazing things about your child, all the things that they can do and all the things that make you smile, and have a sit down and read through that. I'll stop talking for a bit and let Lisa talk.
No, I was going to say, for me, what I kind of tell people, because what's difficult, I think, when you're filling out the form for yourself is, as you'll all know, our lives become our norm, and it's hard to differentiate what we are doing over and above parents of children who are developing typically, because we don't live that life. So we don't know what we're supposed to be doing and what we're not supposed to be doing. We just know what we're doing, and we do it every single day. So what I've done is, because DLA like to ask time ins for everything, and realistically, we're not sitting time in ourselves. Like, how long does it take to bath? How long does it take to wash their hair? Just a long time, But it's not, we're not timing that. So sometimes when I've said to people, if people have emailed and said, "Is there anything I need prior to the appointment?" I would always say, maybe write a diary of your day. Maybe have a look, write down what you're doing. Maybe it's a care need on it, just write down exactly what you're doing that day, and then we can have that conversation about, is that over and above the care need, or what are we doing? Let me see, have you locked your windows? Are you locking your doors? Are you doing this because your child has no danger awareness, whereas you might expect a child who is developing typically to know not to leave the front door? It's all these things that we're just doing because that's what we do. So yeah, it always kind of write a diary of what you're doing. It's really helpful with the times. It doesn't have to be long. You can just do it over a couple of days. It's really helpful with the time and questions as well. And then you kind of have an idea of what to write before you go in there.
You're so right about you're living the life, so you don't necessarily notice all the stuff. So,
Yeah.
like Max is my eldest child. It's all I've ever known. He's all I've ever known. And it really hit home. I went to a birthday party with him at the weekend, and like it really hit home. I went home and I said to my husband, my goodness, like all the other parents were sat having a nice chat, having a drink. And I'm literally on high alert the entire time, lurking by the side of the bouncy castle, like all of this stuff. And I'm thinking, this is not what everybody else's reality is like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think I think him going to school has been a real eye-opener on that
Yeah.
for me, at least.
And I think you'll find generally people with neurodivergent children tend to get drawn to each other. And especially like Gemma was saying, when our children went to the nursery, it was a specialist nursery for autistic children. So our lives were all the same because, obviously differences, but we were all living the same life. So if my child's doing that and Gemma's child's doing that, that becomes the norm. So actually it's not until you walk into a mainstream school and you think, oh, not everyone's doing that. I mean, the biggest thing for me when my son was young is I saw another child around the same age on their scooter, scooting ahead of their parent, and my heart sank. I was like, that child is too far ahead. And then their parent shouted at them and they stopped. And I was like, oh, is this what happens? But if they could never. And I'm like, is that just what happens? And it's those realizations, like you said, when you're at birthday parties that you think, wow, we're living in a completely different world.
Yeah. You've mentioned it a couple of times, but for people listening, there's 2 different components for DLA, care and mobility. How are they broken down?
So the care component is broken down into 3 different rates. So you've got low rate, middle rate, and high rate. There's only one set of criteria really for each one. And the mobility is split into 2 different rates. You've got low rate and high rate. A lot of the queries that we get are to do with high rate mobility. And I assume that this is probably because it is the hardest rate to qualify for. There are 7 different routes, 7 different criteria to high rate mobility. But the 2 that we deal with the majority of the time are the SMI criteria and the VUW criteria. So that's severely mentally impaired and virtually unable to walk. The reason that these are the criteria that we come up against the most when we are helping families is because they're really relevant to autistic children, and that's this area that we're specialist in because of our own children. So the severely mentally impaired criteria is then broken down into 6 different points. It's a cumulative test for SMIs, which means that you have to be able to satisfy all 6 points. If you fail on one, they fail the whole test. So it's quite a harsh criteria. And the VUW criteria has a few different elements to it. It looks at the way in which a child walks, so the manner in which they walk, how long it takes them. But it also looks at behavioural problems and what we call refusals to walk. And these refusals have to be evidenced and shown to be not a conscious choice. They are to be a temporary paralysis of will that is caused by interruptions in the brain's functioning. So this is relevant to autistic children because they have such strong rigidity of thinking and an inability to cope with the unexpected or to cope with change.
Yeah, so the refusal to walk thing I saw recently on one of your videos, and I thought, oh wow, because we literally have to carry Max so frequently. He'll just literally just refuse to walk. Absolutely refuse to walk.
So common with autistic children.
Is that
Well-
linked to the change? Is that what you're saying? That any sort of sudden change, they just can't cope with it?
It depends. Like if he's overwhelmed or sort of deregulated, then it's a no. That will still have problems. But if he's familiar with the walk, then he probably will do it. If it's somewhere new, a different route, somewhere that he's not familiar with, he just wants to be picked up and carried, which is getting harder and harder as he gets older and more heavy.
And I guess there's all different barriers, like you said, if he's overwhelmed. So it's not necessarily just a change. It could be sensory overwhelm. It can be sometimes it's hard to kind of put your finger on what it is. Autistic children, majority will spend a lot of time in fight or flight. So it's one of those situations, I guess, where to freeze or to drop to the floor or to have to carry your children is really common with some of our followers and their families. And that's why we get the most questions, because like Gemma was saying, it has to be across 3 different areas. So, if it's in the community, at home, at school, but, you'd need school to evidence that they're doing that at school as well. Higher rate mobility is really heavily evidence-based. So it is really difficult to get. But there is a criteria, and me and Gemma have had numerous calls, and numerous people have been awarded because of the statements we've written. But it is very, very heavily evidence-based in order to get that mark.
And I guess it's important to say as well that not every DLA application will get through first time. I was lucky-minded, but that is the case, isn't it? That a lot of them don't.
Yeah, and do you know what? On our website, we do have criteria for all of the rates, for all of the elements, sorry. So we do have criteria for it. And I think it's important to look at that criteria when you're applying or have knowledge of it, because then you know if your child, or you kind of would understand what rate your child fits into. So if you've been awarded correctly. And if you think, actually, I thought my child should have got high rate care, for example, and I can evidence that, then challenge it. And be, don't. And it's hard for us, it's easy for us to say challenge it, but we also understand when you're trying to apply, and you're also probably alongside that applying for an EHCP, you've probably got a tribunal with the local authority for a school place. You've got so much going on that it's the least of your worries. But where you do get time, challenge it if you think your child should get a higher rate.
And then would they backdate that from when you first applied for it?
DLA state on their letters that you have 1 calendar month to appeal a DLA decision. You actually legally have 13 months. And the only thing that you risk or compromise by sending in what they class as a late appeal, so after the first initial month, is the back pay. So if you disagree with a rate, the first thing we tell people to do, which not everyone does, is ring DLA and request their statement of reasons. Now, when you get an award letter, it may have some reasons on that letter, but it's hardly ever the extensive list. So always request the statement of reasons, because that is the basis of your appeal. So if you were, for example, going for high rate mobility under the SMI criteria and you requested the statement of reasons, it may be that DLA have only discounted your child on 2 points, and therefore you don't need to prove the whole criteria. You just need to prove those 2 points. Because if the other points haven't been raised, then DLA have accepted that your child meets criteria on those points. So if you ring DLA to request a mandatory reconsideration within 1 calendar month, you can state on the phone that you want a mandatory reconsideration and that you will be sending in further evidence by post. By telling DLA over the phone that you want a mandatory reconsideration, you've met that 1 month appeal window. And then any evidence that you then send in, right up until DLA make a new decision, is classed as further evidence. If you meet that first deadline, then if they overturn their decision or choose to higher the rate, any backdated monies owed will then be backdated to when the original decision was made.
Brilliant.
This is the thing, though, with DLA, isn't it? You're obviously an absolute expert, but for the majority of people, this is really overwhelming, isn't it?
It is really overwhelming. There's so much criteria, so many laws and processes to follow. And I guess that's why our videos can be so helpful and why they're doing so well.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I've got a quick one. So anxiety. So my son definitely suffers with anxiety. I presume that fits in the care component as well as the mobility, because it affects almost everything that he does. So what's the best way to evidence anxiety?
So again, that would be something that you've probably mentioned to professionals that's going to be referenced in their reports. And we always say this with evidence in everything, and there is an exception to this, but school is a fantastic source of evidence. because our children spend the majority of our children, if they're on a full-time timetable, spend so much time there that their needs are usually noticed by school. And I say usually because there are a couple of exceptions. So we have children that mask, and schools don't have a lot of knowledge about masking. And we have some situations where school is just not supportive of anything, of an EHCP or of DLA, and for whatever reason. But school is a fantastic source of evidence. With anxiety, you would have mentioned this. I'm sure most parents would have mentioned it to a medical professional, and it would be referenced into a report. But to a degree, the form that you're filling out, the DLA form itself, is a piece of evidence. What we say has to be taken as a piece of evidence. And we see this a lot of times when what the parent says is very different to what school says. Now, there is DLA case law that states that a decision cannot solely be made on evidence from one place. In particular, they were referencing school in this case law. If the information and evidence from two different sources differs, both of them have to be taken into account when making a decision.
Okay. Yeah, that's really useful to know, because I would imagine there's a lot of people listening and who are watching your videos who are probably on really long waiting lists, so maybe haven't seen professionals yet to get that report, whose children need and deserve DLA, and perhaps are struggling in school or school aren't supportive. So it must be quite difficult for them to feel like they can provide the evidence to support the application.
You know, when you're talking about wait lists, this is one of the biggest questions we get in DMs on Insta, is around people are holding off because they might have a paediatrician appointment in 2 months' time. Send the DLA form, because until they make a decision, you can keep sending in evidence. So if you put a new claim form in, I mean, the wait, it differs, but we're averaging around 20 weeks. In that 20 weeks, you can keep posting evidence to them. As long as it's got your child's name and date of birth on it, on every piece of evidence, you can keep posting it in. So don't we do that a lot, and someone will say, oh, I've got an appointment in 3 months' time. But I was like, get your form in, because then your 20-week wait, whatever the week wait is at that time, has started. So get that form in afterwards. So don't kind of hold off and wait for these reports if you know they're coming. Just send it off.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I did that. I waited for the report to come through. Yeah, I waited to see the paediatrician. I waited for everything. And actually, in hindsight, I probably should have and could have sent it off earlier. On the thought of sending it off, so I asked Amy this after my husband had popped it in the post, but I was quite alarmed that the address that you put on the envelope is just an address that's not tracked or anything like that. So I then got told by a friend that afterwards that actually I could have put a tracked postage stamp on it. That might be helpful, because I was horrified at sending all this information about my child through the post with absolutely no security whatsoever.
Yeah, so the envelope that they provide you with the form is a free post address. It doesn't have a postcode. Although I have seen a couple of free post ones now that do have the postcode. So I don't know whether they're changing the way that they do things, but you need a postcode to be able to send it by tracked delivery. You can find that on it's certainly in some of our videos somewhere, and online. Always use the postcode address, always send it by recorded delivery, just to protect yourself, not just from, if it gets lost, you're never going to get your evidence back, and that is really sensitive information that we're sending, so there's always that worry. But in terms of meeting deadlines and to get back pays and stuff, it is always worth having proof of postage. They do lose things. These letters as well, everything we send to them, I don't know if you've had a look at the address that is actually on there. We're not actually sending it to the DLA offices. We're sending it to a post handling site where everything gets opened, everything gets scanned into a system, and the DLA decision makers access that through the scan system. They're not looking at actual paperwork. And that brings up another good point, actually, that I should mention, where people like to highlight important parts out of their evidence. The highlighter pens do not show up on their scanning system. So if you want to highlight something in a document, you are best to underline it with a biro.
just talking about specialist schools, you touched on that slightly. I saw that both or one of you were going through tribunals for your children. How have you sort of found that journey as well? And do you get questions on that through Instagram?
Yeah, we do. So we have both gone through tribunals for different reasons, for different placements, and for different things for our children. And that is at the nursery, probably one of the biggest supports we offer, is advice through tribunal. And it's difficult because we're going for different things, but generally we are going to tribunal over EHCPs, and school placements is one of the biggest things. We do get questions about that, but I think our page is kind of gearing more towards DLA. So we don't get lots and lots of stuff around tribunals, but we do have the knowledge of tribunal and what forms to submit and how to get school placements. Um, but at the moment, with our EHCP services and tribunals, we're kind of keeping them within Hertfordshire, just for now, because we are so inundated with DLA stuff that we're kind of keeping them for people that we can maybe personally meet up with, to get all that information, because they're quite complex. Tribunals are quite complex to navigate through.
So your support for DLA, how can people listening who are thinking, I desperately need some help with this, how can they get in touch with you, find you, get support from you?
So we used to say you can DM us, and I know that sometimes on Insta or TikTok, and then everything has gone pretty wild. And DMs on Insta get filtered through and they get hidden, and we found that we miss so many. And then obviously we're busy with the phone calls all day, or we're busy with emails all day, that we might not be answering social media until the evening. So the best way to get in touch with us, and the only way at the moment that you're going to get an efficient service from and a response from our admin team, is via the inquiry form on our website. And that will directly put you in touch with our admin team, who then will sort out all the bookings and everything you need to know. We do try, and I know we do try our best to respond to DMs, but it just, as I'm sure you can imagine, we get inundated, especially if we put a video out there that is of interest to so many people. Our inbox just goes wild, and there's just not enough time in the day. And whereas we used to, before this was a business, me and Gemma used to spend every day just responding to everyone on TikTok, on Instagram. We would spend our whole time, Facebook, whatever it might be, we would respond to everyone that asked us a question. It would just be impossible now. But we still have that guilt sometimes, but we want to help everyone. But there's just two of us. There's two of us and an admin team. So yeah, the best way is through the inquiry form on our website if you want to book a service.
It just goes to show how helpful and needed
Yeah.
everything that you're doing is. It really does.
We do get DMs saying, we're so grateful for your help. We're equally grateful that everyone wants us to do their paperwork for them, that everyone's kind of got on board with what we're doing. But yeah, so we do feel like we would love to help more and more people. I mean, at the moment, if you want an appointment, we're currently booking in like the middle of April now. So it's getting quite, and that's where, me and Gemma started off thinking, we'll just do like one job here and there, or 3 days a week. We're talking 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, trying to
Wow.
fit everyone in, and it's still impossible.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us then, because I must have got fortunate when I contacted you to come on the
You
podcast.
did, and I know I was trying to keep going, keep in touch with you, and I was like, we're still here. It's very difficult. Our diaries are very, very busy at the moment, which is great. It's great. We're not complaining.
And I guess if you get lots of questions about the same subject, that helps you with creating videos, because you can then think, right, we'll create that video and then that answers that question. So no question
And
is a
what
silly
we
question.
found, no, of course not, no question at all. And we get that a lot. And we get, this might sound silly, but nothing is a silly question. But what we're finding, and what's really nice for us, is where our social media platform is growing bigger, if we'll just put a reel out, and that reel, so we'll be busy within the day, we might go and look at that reel at the night with the comments or DMs, and especially in the comments, people are answering each other who have been through it. So it's building that community feel. It's like we'll go to answer something, and I'm like, actually, I just need to heart that because someone's answered that for me. And it's kind of, it's building that community around people, because everyone's at a different stage of the journey. Everyone's got more knowledge than someone else. And yeah, it is nice. We're seeing that more and more at the moment.
I think this is what we're all trying to do, isn't it? Just build a community where we can all kind of help each other and lean on each other, because it is stressful. I think, that's a message that we get from I get from anyone that I speak to, that it is just tough at points. You've covered so much stuff, but any other tips and advice that you would want to give to listeners?
Any advice, I guess, as mums as well, for, for the experience you've had, for the mums listening that maybe are at their start of their SEND journey as well?
I think my biggest thing to people is, you know your child better than anyone knows your child. You are the professional of your child. If you believe something is right for your child, then don't give up fighting for that. Because there is so much law that supports your children and have your children in the best interest. And we're finding that when people are going up against local authorities, this isn't with DLA, this is EHCP school placements, and what children are entitled to, they're not getting told the truth always. And I think when you're new to this journey, you believe people who you deem in authority. But kind of look out there, see what support is there for your children, because our children do deserve equal opportunities to everyone else. They have that right to thrive. They have that right to be a part of this world. And I think just shout loudly for your child.
And just to touch on what Lisa said there, with not always being told the law, what's true by the law, just to highlight the biggest thing that we hear across the whole country is about waiting lists. So talking about EHCPs, a lot of families are being told that their child is on a waiting list. And if you believe that, your child will continue to wait until they're about 8, if not longer. This is the biggest lie that we hear from the local authorities. Not that I'm calling them out. Local authorities are under a lot of pressure, just like the education boards are, the schools are. There's not enough support, there's not enough funding. We know this. But I think one of the biggest detrimental things that local authorities have done has broken down that trust between them and parents. It should always be us working together for the best outcomes of the child. It should have never developed into this us at war with them and vice versa. But there are no waiting lists for these schools. There are what is called referrals lists, which is just a list of children that would be suitable for that school. But that is not a static list that once you get to the top, you're the next one to be placed. It is an ever-moving list. And the only way to get a place, like Lisa said, is to shout the loudest. And it's unfortunate that this is the way that things are. But for us, that means taking them to tribunal.
And you can obviously support people who are at that point potentially, or who are looking down that glass potentially for their child.
Yeah. And we have a workshop coming out soon, actually, with the lovely Amy and the Spectrum Syndicate, where we are joining forces to help with EHCP.
Oh, brilliant. Fantastic. So anyone listening who's at that point, and actually I know many people who are, give that a listen. Definitely. Oh, thank you so much for joining us. You've been brilliant. I've learned so much. Yeah.
Thank you for having us.